Hello and welcome to the Trent Affair. Now, I'm doing something which I know many of my lovely followers and subscribers do not always enjoy. And that is, I'm doing the other live before the introduction comes out. And the reason I'm doing that is because this is such a fun topic and there is so much stuff talked about it that honestly, if I let the introduction video go out before the live, it will spoil lots of people's fun. And what's the point of watching the live if I already told you what I'm going to say? Sometimes with topics, in fact, most of the time topics, I do an introduction to give you the background of it. But this is a what if. It's what if the Trent Affair had gone hot. And that means there is a difference. That means there is a very big difference. If the Trent Affair had gone hot, you have all sorts of fun things that could happen. And this will be a sort of a bit of an introduction video for anybody who's not watched it before, but the live is going to give far more details because that's the fun part. So, what are the backgrounds? Well, there's the Oregon boundary dispute, which is going on, which will also lead to the War of the Pig. We'll leave that to one side, which I have talked about in several times before due to various admirals' involvement, including Hornby, who is a bit of a hero of mine, as I think he's such a good admiral. But the fact is, there has been a dispute over the control of certain areas. And interesting enough, you know there's that little squiggle bit of Canada, which goes onto the Pacific coast. The Oregon boundary dispute is what creates that, okay? Because, as you can see, the Americans claimed up to 54 degrees 40, the British claimed as low as 42 degrees, and they ended up settling on 49 degrees. Thanks to arbitration by the lovely Kaiser of Germany. Anyway, so let's consider the US Civil War. That's the more current thing and background to the Trent Affair. When the Trent Affair happens, the Civil War is 8 months old. It's 8 months old. That means that the Confederacy is still doing rather well. And the US is nowhere near built up to the point it is going. For example, McClellan is still considered a good general. Let's consider that. McClellan is still considered a good general. Sorry, every time I say that, I need to wash it away quickly. Just so wrong. Anyway, of the battles so far that have taken place by the end of 1861, there have been 35. The Confederates have won 15. 7 have been inconclusive, mainly either both sides claiming victory or them actually being defeated by the weather. Rain come down fierce. 13 have been won by the Union. Most importantly, the eye-catching first Battle of Bull Run on the 21st of July had been a Confederate victory. So many weird uniforms. So many wearing weird uniforms. We won't get into that. I have to occasionally teach it. We won't get into the first Battle of the Bull Run. But anyway, the US Navy has decided it's got to grow rapidly, and it sent various officers around the world to find out what they need to find out. And one of those is a Lieutenant David Dixon Porter, who, like his adopted brother, David Farragut, will go on to become an admiral in the US Navy. Writes to an old friend who's, and also former US Navy lieutenant, who's an assistant secretary of the Navy by this time, with the coolest name of anyone in the American Civil War. I'm sorry. Gustavus Fox. I might not agree with all his decisions. I might think sometimes he's a bit strange. But his name is Gustavus Fox. Gustavus Fox. There is nothing cooler than that name. It is absolutely walking into the room, unless you're walking in a room and going, I am HMS Warspite, or I am, I don't know, HMS Eskimo. I am Gustavus Fox just sounds cool. And this is what he writes. I went on board a small English screw sloop the other day, the Jason, built in 1859. And with her, one Armstrong gun, which some folks say is a failure, but I say is not. She would whip the largest ship in the Navy out of her boots, or more properly speaking, her pumps, perhaps even her bilge pumps. As ships don't wear boots, the point-blank range of this Armstrong gun is 1.5 miles, which settles the question for none of our guns will more than reach that with the greatest elevation. Okay, doesn't sound that great for the US Navy at this point. So the Trent Affair happens. And basically, a guy called Captain Charles Wilkes is in charge of the US steam frigate San Jacinto, which is sent variously down south with various orders and wanders into the Caribbean, theoretically hunting the CSS Sumter, but honestly, Captain Wilkes is not exactly the person to follow orders. He's fairly aggressive and is probably thinking of what certain other officers are doing, which is trying to hunt down Confederate envoys. He hears about those envoys, and he hears that they're going to be leaving Havana on, and I managed to spell Havana correctly, on the 7th, November 7th. Cute. Microsoft Word didn't pick that up. Neither did PowerPoint. Anyway. So, what happens isn't really... What doesn't matter is that he does stop the Trent. It is rather annoying because I would have loved a picture of Captain Moir, but I haven't been able to find a picture of him. That's the captain of the Trent, which is a mail ship, a mail steamer. They board it, and interesting enough, Wilkes' orders are to take the ship as a prize. Okay? Here's the interesting thing. We'll get into this in a second, but his orders are to take the ship as a prize. Lieutenant Fairfax, who's his executive officer, who he sends to do it, and who also ends up as an admiral. In fact, pretty much every naval officer I've discussed so far serving ends up as an admiral in the US Navy. Although Wilkes ends up as a rear admiral on the retired list because he managed to get into a argument with the Secretary of the Navy, who basically kicks him out. But he's an interesting soul, so we'll leave that to one side. He at one point tried to court-martial his entire group of officers when he was on an expedition. So, including, I think, at one point, taking court-martial off one so he could be involved in the court-martial of another. It's fun. Fun personality. Anyway, his specific orders are to try and take the ship as prize. But Fairfax takes a look round the Trent, considers the amount of prize crew they'd have to put aboard her to secure her, and also thinks the fact that the Americans taking a ship, a Royal Navy, well, not Royal Navy ship, but a British flagged, and more importantly, a mail steamer, which is... How do I put this politely? A mail steamer is not always owned by the Royal Mail Company, but is often chartered by them, and it is carrying the Queen's Post. And if you interfere with the Queen's Post, it's kind of like if you interfere with the US Postal Service or any official government postal service which carries official government dispatches. The the fact it may or may not be an actual warship is less important than the diplomatic furor which can go around it. So, luckily, the two gentlemen aboard step forward and go, yes, we're here. And so there isn't really a fight, although it is boarded. Fairfax tries not to get it boarded by by the sailors on the party with him, but they end up boarding because they hear basically people shouting at Fairfax and threatening him. Also, what's interesting is there's a Royal Navy officer who's so upset with them interfering with the Queen, he actually squirrels away their papers of the two envoys and takes them to Britain himself because he feels it's such an outrage. He does actually disobey the Queen's orders, but he's a Royal Navy commander, and he also ends up quite a senior officer, so it's unsurprising, basically. Just outraged by this honour they've shown by firing on the British flag. So what happens? What are the consequences of it immediately? Well, there's a small problem for it. Now, here's the interesting thing. When you consider that and what I've just described, I could also be describing the Asamamaru incident with HMS Liverpool, i.e. warship pulls up third-party vessel in middle of ocean and pulls off members of the opposing state on board. Difference might be considered is the definitions under law by that point. There are certain things going around in terms of various conventions which may or may not give them rights to do it, but as we've been over before, don't actually and do technically make it illegal. So this is technically illegal. But the thing is, the Royal Navy is quite a massive power, and as I said again, this was the mail steamer. So, you have Lieutenant Fairfax, Secretary of State Seward, and then Wilkes. Final one in those pictures. As I said, couldn't find one, I kept them more. Seward had actually at one point been articulating the case for war against Britain as a way of reunifying because he felt that the Confederates would drop their ambitions for independence and rally to the flag to fight a foreign power. At this point, he suddenly does a reappraisal and a quick about turn and is rapidly going, no, that's not a good idea. That's not a good idea. Starts off being rather bellicose, and everyone's very proud. Oh, yes, we've got the convoys. And then they start to realize, okay, under law, if they'd brought the British ship into a prize court, and a prize court had done an adjudication, under law, it would have been technically legal and the British would have had to accept it because that's technically what they've done in the past. Okay? British are very, very cautious. They wouldn't have liked it, and it would have possibly caused far more aggro otherwise and could have led to war. But technically, it was actually more legal to have followed Wilkes' original orders, despite him still overstating and doing things he shouldn't have done, because they're really stopping a British, the mail ship, it is diplomatically issued, because if he had actually done with his full orders, because his full orders included a full search of the ship and a search of all papers on board, that would have included searching the British diplomatic papers on board, which would have been an act of war. So if Fairfax had followed Wilkes's orders, that would have definitely been an act of war. However, if he'd not followed that order, but still brought the ship into a prize court, that would have possibly been okay under the law as it stood at the time. It's a debate. Remember, maritime law is increasingly massively set on precedent. There is no legal precedent for what Wilkes does, and this is what causes a furor. Ultimately, the Americans the U.S. Union forces end up handing the envoys over to the British and letting them go and not interfering in anything, and sort of basically stepping back, but not apologizing. publicly. Privately, there's all sorts of messages which are communicated to the British. And the thing is, the British don't really want to get in a war with America, not because they're not able to. And just remember, they will mobilize nearly 30,000 troops and have them in Canada very quickly. Within less than a couple of months, they'll have before the affair is over, they will have nearly 30,000 regular soldiers gone from England to Canada. Okay, 30,000 soldiers. Yes, that's not a massive army, but that's possibly enough to do it to keep keep Canada secure. Because how much in 1861, bordering 1862, can the Union afford to split off from their attacks in America? And they're fighting with Confederate forces to go and attack Canada. More importantly, and this is what worked out quite quickly as well, the whole point of the Anaconda Plan, which we'll discuss at the end, was to encircle the South, the Confederates, and starve them of supplies. Now, yes, there are weaknesses in Bermuda. Bermuda is not a great naval base at this point. It would require a lot of money to defend it. And yes, the Canadian forts mostly exist on paper. But the Royal Navy is sufficiently large. Whilst it wouldn't have been a walkover or a quick fight, it's not something which either side really wanted. But they're also, I don't think many Union officers, once they really started thinking about it, were really in doubt as to what would happen at sea and what the effects it could be on land. It wasn't the British Army which would be a problem. They would be landed, British forces probably in Canada, and various other places to protect British interests. And there were various ideas about maybe descending on Oregon and resetting that boundary dispute. You know? A nice long way away from all the major fighting going on the major Union forces and causing the Union to be really, really upset. Because again, when we talk about the American Civil War, you have to remember a lot of logistics go by sea for both sides. So, leaving that to one side, what are the facts going on? Most often, why is this so interesting? Because more often than not, people turn it into a debate about HMS Warrior versus USS Monitor. And here's the thing. By the time of the Trent Affair, Warrior has been commissioned for 3 months. She's about a little bit longer, in fact, than an Arethusa class cruiser. Well, no. Give or take. It's the long... there are parts of it which make her longer, but I'm going by hull length. She's roughly shorter, but there again, there's... you can see. Okay? But she's beamier. And she's got nice thick armor. She has a full ship rig, and she can quite honestly sail the ocean quite well. In fact, she's still afloat to this day. And she has a range of 2,100 nautical miles at 11 knots on the fuel carried. Not carrier, on the carried. She carries 26 smoothbore muzzle loading 68-pounder, and that's, broadly speaking, 8-inch guns. 10 rifled breech loading 110-pounder. They're about 6.5-inch guns. Maybe 6.6. 4 rifled breech loading 40-pounders. 4.5-inch, broadly speaking. And had a 4.5-inch belt, plus bulkheads also 4.5 inches. Now, that armor is mostly iron and steel, iron more likely, over teak, which is a very, very strong material and is actually very good and easy to repair. And also, with the metallurgy available at the time, that produces a very good armor composite. Monitor. Monitor class, coastal monitor. Please note that, a coastal monitor. It's going to have bearing to what I say later. Ordered on the 4th of October, 1861. So she'd only been ordered about a month before. About a month before the Trent Affair happens and starts off. She's commissioned on the 25th of February, 1862. So, let's put it this way. If Trent Affair had led to a very quick war, let's say starting in December, the Royal Navy would have had HMS Warrior able to not wander up free. Let's be honest, you need a lot of ports to operate with the coal ships that have the time to have them going around. So the idea of having a long-running blockade on the whole US coast is not really a sensible matter. But with Napoleon III actually supporting Britain, that's the guy who's running France at this moment, in this affair, because he considers what the Americans to be so abhorrent to international law because they don't use a prize court, they don't do it properly, and they interfere with a mail ship. That's MAIL, just checking for future. And also, due to a legacy of the Crimean War, he's kind of pro-British at this point. It's not necessary for Britain to run a close blockade. They can do a distant blockade with their sailing squadrons in the middle of the ocean, or the ships they have available. What they would be using vessels like Warrior for, etc., would be to probably run convoys of merchant ships in and out of Confederate ports. And there ain't much in the way of the US Navy that could stop them. Not short term. And yes, supporting them in Bermuda would be interesting and various other places, but they could do it. They would find a way and the money to do it. You also have the fact the British do have a lot of steamships around the world. They have steam frigate. They even have a steam frigate, although not an ironclad steam frigate, but they do have a steam frigate sitting on the other side of America on the Pacific coast. So they have these ships going around, and lots of other steamships. They have about 6 out there, and only one of them is considered in bad condition. Let's see. The Monitor has a maximum speed of 6 knots. It's a far, far smaller vessel. It's a far lighter vessel. It's got 2 11-inch, 280mm smoothbore Dahlgren guns, which is nice. They're far more powerful. They're very powerful guns. And it's got lots of armor. But as we know, it famously gets sunk in a storm. It is not a seagoing ship in what any of us would consider. Coastal maybe, and coastal not on too rough a day. Which is a problem. Because if you're going to deal with HMS Warrior and the Brethren coming after her and the Royal Navy as a whole, if the Royal Navy isn't going to hang around on the coast, and I do know there's one famous example, an idea, which is that the Monitor would have snuck up on the Warrior at night or in the dawn. Well, for that to happen, you would have to have Warrior having stopped somewhere overnight or dawn that it can easily be approached. That there aren't going to be boats and things going around as sentry duties. I think that's an A. B. Where is the Warrior going to stop? If the Warrior isn't stopping, if the Warrior is just running in with other ships, a load of merchant ships into harbour, then picking up and running straight out in the direction of Bermuda, it's going to be daytime. It's going to be at sea. If it can keep range and just keep lobbing its shells over, it's able to fire far more, and the Monitor can't catch it. So my thinking is, if Warrior manages, for some reason, does get caught in shallow waters and the Monitor is able to get close astern and rake it from stern without the Warrior detecting, yeah, Monitor has a chance. Although, of course, remember, those bulkheads, that iron and teak, they are the whole way through the Warrior, as well as just on the hull. So it might not. It might do damage, but it might not. But the thing is, the Royal Navy wouldn't play that game. So what might have been with the war? Well, Britain would have to reinforce Canada and Bermuda with the army, which is what they were doing already. The moment the actual Trent Affair starts, and the first thing they start doing is start sending out reinforcements, just in case there's a war. And the thing is, if the British managed to break the blockade and managed to do enough damage to it, to the US enforcement of it, because remember, the US hasn't got many monitors. They have one. It's USS Monitor. Then they're building more after, but again, they're not going to come into service that quickly. So you have one in service, one great coastal monitor, woohoo, and you have these great forts which can stop the British maybe doing an attack from sea. But as Farragut and Porter will show, committed ships can blast past forts if they want to. The Royal Navy would be quite committed, but would they want to do that? No, they wouldn't need to, because as long as they can do to America what they did to Napoleon the First and various other things, they will quite happily keep the Confederates, or as in the European sense, they would have been the Prussians, but the Confederates, supplied with money and arms, and keep their economy going, and let them do the ground fighting, while the Royal Navy just deals with the stuff at sea. And that would have been a big problem for the Union to deal with. It would have been, because the reason the Confederates were able to be beaten was because they don't have lateral logistics. Okay, they have most of their railway lines, most of their logistic supplies go down following rivers, go to the coast, are about moving goods from the interior to the exterior for trade. They rely on shipping for it to go across. The success in many ways of the Union battle plan and the Union war plan was to stop that shipping going across. The Royal Navy would just have to allow that shipping to take place. That is all they'd have to do. Disrupt the blockade enough to allow the Confederates to keep supplying their troops, keep moving the stuff around. Yes, the Union has tremendous advantages in terms of personnel and in numbers and in terms of industry. Well, if you take off the flow of Irish from Ireland, because probably they're being hired by the British to come and fight in Canada and various other places, so that reduces that supply of recruits. If you suddenly have the Royal Navy taking out your trade around the world, the French not being helpful, and the British imposing a distant blockade, for want of better terms, but also actively interdicting and actively disrupting your attempt to blockade the Confederates, you suddenly can't move your stuff around by sea. Yes, you have internal lines of communication, which is lovely, but if you can't, that's great. You can use them, but if you have the British turning up in Oregon, you then do have to use them, and you still got those huge armies. And now the Confederate force, instead of having their huge armies running out of food, running out of ammunition, running out of everything, you have them getting supplies. My likely outcome is it ends up in a negotiated peace. That is the obvious thing that happens to it. It ends up in a negotiated peace. Because I don't agree the idea that the Confederates have these amazing generals, but I do, compared to McClellan, they do, but that's not really a high mark. I just think that it ends up with negotiated peace, because you have Britain and the Confederates will probably recognize each other, and France will recognize Confederacy, And if Mexico recognizes the Confederacy and does nasty stuff in Texas or anything like that in their particular trains, and you just end up with the Union facing so many enemies and such a big threat that at a certain point they decide to start a quarter day. I don't think they'd want to. I don't think it would be something they would accept lightly or want to dive into. But I think you would have them sitting there going, "How much can we afford to lose?" Because the war is financed by all sorts of loans and war debts and all these things, and if you are fighting, you must remember. The reason the Confederacy loses in many ways is because the Union are able to attack all around them. Under this scenario, you're flipping that, and now it's the Union which can be attacked from anywhere, and the Confederacy which are able to import-export. As I said, I think a negotiated settlement is what ends up probably in about 1862, because I doubt the British will want to fight a long war, and they'll probably start it off immediately going to the Union. Do you want peace? After they've had sort of enough victories at sea. And those victories will be things that a fighter will not probably involve the Monitor. This is the thing. The naval battles we all talk about when we're talking about Monitor versus versus CSS Virginia and all these things, they happen up on the high up on the Atlantic coast relative to the whole war. The British involvement would move quite a lot of those operations and quite a lot of the focus of the fighting down south. And would things like New Orleans fall, etc.? Possibly not. Quite probably not, actually, because they'd be still getting supplies. And the Confederates would be able to supply them at will. Anyway, for more about HMS Warrior, please go there. I have borrowed some pictures shamelessly. And for more about USS Monitor, please go there. And I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly have enjoyed looking into this, and I hope you go to the live, which will be linked below, because I think you're going to have a lot of fun with that. Yeah, I know I'm going to. Right. Take care. Have a nice day, and thank you to everyone who has liked this video. Thank you to everyone who's subscribed. Thank you to everyone who's pressed that little bell down there. And please do consider joining Discord or Patreon, because if you join one, you get to have lots of really cool chats about lots of interesting stuff, including Bilge Pump stuff, as well as stuff done on my YouTube channel. And on the Patreon, well, you get to see all the slides and comment on them and vote for the patron choices. And of course, this video is a patron choice proposed by the CIA. Second time they've won. I am getting worried about vote rigging going on, but you know, I'm not a small American country, a small South American country, so I'm not sure why the CIA would be rigging votes on my Patreon. Anyway, take care, have a nice day, and thank you.